We have some huge updates on the NHL offseason rumor mill regarding some potential blockbuster trades we might see this summer. We're talking about players like Alex DeBrincat, Kevin Fiala, Tony DeAngelo, John Gibson, Tyson Barrie, Jeff Petrie, and others. Plus, we have the latest updates on the NHL coaching carousel, some more signings, and we're going to get ready for Game 5 tonight in the Eastern Conference Final. All that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of NHL news and a bunch of really interesting trade rumors to take a look at here today. First up, let's get ready for Game 5 tonight between the Rangers and the Lightning in the Eastern Conference Final. Of course, we know the series won't be over tonight. We're going to get at least one more game, Game 6 Saturday night. But can the Lightning carry the momentum to take the series lead is the big question. They've already announced that Braden Point is definitely still going to remain out for the Lightning. As of the recording of this video, which is mid-afternoon, I haven't heard on the Rangers about like Ryan Strome or Philip Hedl. I would suspect they're probably going to be game time decisions. I would imagine, like last time, they may take warm-up and may have a few extra players ready just in case or whatnot. So we'll see. Gaudreau's also banged up a bit. Ryan Lindgren's been a warrior, getting all kinds of different injuries off and on. So be interesting to see where this goes. But to me, the Rangers, they need to come out and have Igor really be a dominant factor. I mean, he has been really good majority of the time, but he really needs to be exceptional tonight, and they need to score at least a couple goals at 5-on-5 if they're going to have a chance to win, or things could start to slip away here. We'll see. The Lightning have been a very resilient team, and it's really hard to bet against them, but it should be very interesting. Game 5 this evening. Now, as I mentioned, we also have a couple of signings announced today. The Red Wings have signed a very interesting prospect. He was originally a 2019 6th-round pick, but that's Swedish forward Elmer Soderblom. He gets his 3-year entry-level contract. He played over in the SHL this past year for Frölunda, where he put up 21 goals in 52 games, so that's pretty good for that league. But this guy is 6'8", 249 pounds. He sounds like an absolute monster. So we'll see what happens with him next year. Certainly he'll be making the jump to North America, but what is going to happen, where I imagine he'll play in the American Hockey League to start. But this guy really, like, the size of him alone is just intimidating to think about. So we'll see what happens with him next year. Be a very interesting prospect to follow. And the Nashville Predators are signing prospect Marcus Nurmi. There's a 23-year-old forward. He was one of the guys we talked about at the end of May that the draft rights were expiring. He was originally a 6th-round pick back in 2016 of the Ottawa Senators, but was never signed. So he's now a free agent and has now become a member of the Predators organization. He played last year over in Liga and put up 20 goals and 39 points in his season over there. So we'll see what happens with him in the Nashville organization. Now, lots of updates on the NHL coaching carousel. There's a lot of teams that with vacancies. Like I said, nobody's really hired anybody as of yet. The only thing that we've seen confirmed is Marty St. Louis getting the full-time job in Montreal. Otherwise, lots of question marks. We've seen lots of coaches let go, lots of openings. As of right now, it looks like the Dallas Stars are more than likely hiring Pete DeBoer. He appears to be the front runner. I know Elliot Friedman talked about that today on the Jeff Merrick show and said basically unless something goes astray here last second that they don't foresee happening, that he's likely going to be the guy. Talking around many NHL teams and executives, the only kind of concern with DeBoer is he appears to be a kind of coach that's really hard on his goalies, but obviously with the right plan and talking with that with him, obviously if that's not a concern for them, then certainly he would make a good fit. Obviously, he'd be familiar with Joe Pavelski, who he coached in San Jose. And I know some made a comparison as well. The Dallas Stars team of today certainly have a good young core that's kind of becoming the next phase of this team, being the leaders slowly. But they still have an older crop too, right? So they are overall an older team, and it draws a lot of comparisons to the team that the Sharks had 6-7 years ago that went to the Stanley Cup final. So he's certainly used to that kind of dynamic. So, it should be a situation that feels very familiar to him in a sense. Not to say he's going to automatically take Dallas to the final or anything like that, but, it certainly draws comparisons to the Sharks teams that he worked with during his tenure there. So that looks like that's going to happen, but it's not official as of yet. On the Flyers coaching front, apparently they have interviewed a few other people besides John Tortorella. Tortorella and Barry Trotz, I believe, was supposed to be in that mix too. Trotz has been very quiet. There has been really nothing new on him in a number of days now. But Torts right now appears to be, you could say he's kind of a front runner, or at least I don't know if he's the front runner, but he's very much a contender. It's reported by Frank Seravalli that he's expected to have a second interview when they do round 2, which is coming up soon. So that's good for him. But apparently they have talked to David Quinn and Jeff Blashill as well, and there's belief that they may want to speak to the newly found unemployed coach Bruce Cassidy out of Boston. So we'll see if the Cassidy's availability suddenly changes things at all, or if Quinn and Blashill can be in the running too. I don't know how those interviews went, obviously, so we'll see. The Blackhawks have reached out to a couple of assistant coaches. Obviously, their team going in a different direction here, and they might talk to some other experienced guys as well, but they have asked Vancouver for permission to speak to assistant coach Brad Shaw, and they've also requested permission from the Montreal Canadiens to speak to assistant coach Luke Richardson. So there's a couple of guys there that are looking for their opportunity. Of course, Derek King, the interim head coach, who was brought up from their AHL team, is still very much in the mix. This does not mean that King is not getting the job. It just means that before they make that decision, that they want to talk to some other people just to see if what's the right thing. It looked like the same thing when they hired Kyle Davidson as the full-time general manager. He was interim. They brought in a lot of other candidates. Some were fairly high-profile names around the hockey or executive world, and they still ended up sticking with what they had, but it certainly pays to do your research. And another name in Detroit as well, like I said, with Philly, David Quinn was the Flyers interview, and it's being reported that the Red Wings have also spoken with Quinn, and there is a lot of people that believe that Yzerman will also speak to Cassidy as well. They're both from the same circles from the Ottawa area in Ontario, and likely have a lot of the same connections. Depending, I don't know if they have a relationship themselves, but many believe that they have enough probably common acquaintances and everything that they're likely going to be talking here about that potential job too. And speaking of Bruce Cassidy, he did speak to the media today. Obviously still fairly fresh after being let go by the Boston Bruins. The media were able to speak to him through connection. The Boston Bruins helped hook it up through a Zoom meeting. And he had some, he basically came in kind of hot. He sounded like he was pretty pissed off, which is, I would not find surprising at all. But I mean, he did say that when they did exit interviews at the end of the season, a couple of weeks ago, he was led to believe that it was status quo and his job was safe. They even, like I said, which we'd already reported and discussed the fact that Don Sweeney acknowledged this too in his media availability, that he and Bruce had talked about the coaching staff and had agreed that Kevin Dean, assistant coach, would not return. It was reported throughout the year that Dean and Cassidy had some disagreements and had some issues, which was a little bit surprising in a sense because they had worked together a long time, not just in Boston, but before Cassidy came up from the AHL affiliate of the Bruins, they worked together there too. So they're long time, co-workers, you could say, and probably have a pretty good friendship, I would think. So to be butting heads on stuff is a little bit surprising, but things can change, obviously. This, I guess my kind of theory on some of this as well is, to me, I think Cam Neely runs that show more than Don Sweeney. And we know Don Sweeney's contract is up for negotiation here. They've already said that it's likely going to be getting an extension, that they weren't worried about it. Don Sweeney himself said it was in the works and should be taken care of, fairly quickly. I can't help but wonder, though, if it was presented to him that if he's getting an extension, then he has to change the coach. Because at the end of the day here, I think a lot of the shortcomings of this team could be easily put on management and not necessarily the coach. I'm not saying that there isn't reason for change. I think there is some arguments for that. But at the end of the day, he's a very good coach, and he had a year left on his contract and was led to believe he was going to kind of play that out, so to speak. So why now? Is the timing of it that seemed on, especially after a few weeks, when you could have let him go right away instead of leading him to think that he's coming back next year. Apparently, on Monday, Sweeney had asked to come meet with Bruce at his home and give him the news that they were letting him go. So, I don't blame Bruce Cassidy at all for being upset over not the fact that he lost his job. That's bad enough. Everybody usually, I would think, that would take that, somewhat hard, because especially where he was there in the organization for such a long time. But it's how it was handled. It was handled poorly, in my opinion. And we'll see. I know I've seen a lot of fans online saying that it should be Neely or Sweeney that would be getting the axe here, not Bruce. But At the end of the day, it's they're the ones calling the shots right now. Unless ownership wants to intervene and make a change there, it's probably not going to happen. And right now, we don't have any reason to think that's going to be the case at all. Now, as I mentioned, we got some pretty interesting trade rumors to take a look at here today. Frank Seravalli of DailyFaceoff.com, one of the most locked-in reporters around the NHL, like getting a lot of the scoops on different trades and rumors around the league. It put out an article today with his top updated trade bait board for the offseason. We're about 3-4 weeks away from starting to see more activity. Obviously, as we get closer to the NHL draft, and then of course into free agency, like the draft, leading into the draft and at the draft is usually a busy time. The draft is July 7th, 8th, so we're less than a month from that now. And like I said, 3 to 4 weeks from now, we should start to see some activity, and it could be significant. So the big surprise, though, which we'd already kind of briefly touched on it back in the last, 4 or 5 days, we talked about the Blackhawks, because Elliotte Friedman had reported that they're basically wide open for business, and the only names that they weren't really talking trade on or willing to talk trade on was Taves, Kane, and Jones, only because they don't, they have all the say in a trade. They have a full no-move clause, so there's no point in taking calls and working out deals because they have final say. At some point, it's expected that they will have conversations with them. Probably not so much Jones because he just inked a long-term deal, but likely Taves and Kane, who are entering the final year of their big contracts that they signed together. I'm sure Davidson will have a conversation with him. But of course, when that was mentioned, everybody's like, okay, so anybody else could be available? And he's like, yes. So does that mean Alex DeBrincat's available? And he's like, technically, yes, it does. Now, does that automatically mean they're going to trade him? But it means that they're willing to listen, and if somebody wants to come along with the right package, kind of similar to what Tampa did with Hagel, they basically overpaid because they really like the player. If somebody wants to do that, they'll get the deal done. Now, Frank Seravalli's take on this today, Frank says it's basically inevitable that DeBrincat is going to be traded, and if it doesn't happen this summer, that it will be at the deadline. He's got 1 year left on his contract. So he gives 3 rationales, and I'll give you a little snippet from his article here to take a look at to read along with me. So essentially it says here that the Blackhawks, as we know, are going into a rebuild and really could use a boost of future assets. And of course, Alex DeBrincat, by far their best trade chip. That's point number 1. Alex DeBrincat is going to get you more of a return than any other player in your organization. And that is definitely, I agree with 100%. I mean, Patrick Kane, very valuable player. I think they can get a good haul on him too. But think about the fact that DeBrincat's a 40-goal scorer and way younger than Kane. So teams would have to give up a lot. We're probably looking at a solid 4 assets. I'm thinking at least 1 first-rounder, maybe 2 prospect roster player. Like, it's going to be a big package because he's young and very valuable. Number 2, it says that by the time that they're ready to win and be more competitive, that he's going to be considered like at least a middle-aged player by NHL standards. So if you think about it, Kyle Davidson himself even said it could be 3 to 5 years. So if they're 5 years away from really being able to be a competitive team, consistently, be able to make the playoffs and have a chance to compete for a cup, if that's going to take 5 years, Alex DeBrincat is going to be into his 30s by then, making tons of money. So does that make sense, right? And point number 3 was that he's doing $9 million qualifying offer. So if they're just starting this teardown and they're just starting this rebuild, basically now, because you think about it, last offseason, before Stan Bowman got the axe, they were doing stuff to let you think they were going to try to contend this past year. And look how that went, right? So that set them back a ton. They did the whole Seth Jones thing. They brought in Fleury. They did all these moves trying to contend, and they bombed, right? So now, it's really just the beginning of this. So does it make sense to you if you're tearing it down to sign a guy, even as much as he's young, and I understand you can build around him, I get that argument, but I don't get the feeling here that Chicago wants to have a $9+ million player on a long-term deal on their books while they start this process. If the Seth Jones deal wasn't done now, they wouldn't get done now. If Kyle Davidson had a do-over in that, I bet he would. So clearly, that's kind of the rationale here. So as much as, there is an argument that it doesn't make sense, but when you think about all this, there is certainly, I think, an argument on the other side too that says it kind of does. So it goes to tell you that they are going to be thinking here that this rebuild is going to be long and drawn out. It's probably going to take a good solid 5 years before they're really able to bring things to a competitive level to have a chance to compete. And does it make sense to have 5 more years of Alex DeBrincat at $9+ million while they go through that process? Obviously, they're probably going to want to trim the payroll. They need to have a few leaders around, a few veterans, but they could have not necessarily big time contracts, right? So I guess that does make sense, but teams are going to have to pony up for the price tag. But imagine if he's not traded, he'll be probably one of the biggest names at the deadline if Frank's information here is accurate. So that's big news. Now, he does not have David Pastrnak on his list today, which I also found very interesting, considering all the news we've had on him in the last couple of days. Clearly, he must feel that right now there's obviously less of a chance that happens, which I do agree with. I think it could happen, but I think we're still way too early to say that a Pastrnak trade is remotely realistic at this point. Of course, number 2 on his list, Kevin Fiala. No big surprise there. We've talked about Fiala a lot, linked to a number of teams, Ottawa, Islanders, LA to an extent. We know a trade's coming. Jacob Chikrin, number 3 in Arizona. We've talked about him a lot before too. Obviously, he made it clear that he definitely wants out of Arizona, and he, likely is going to be pushing for them to get a deal done here as well. But certainly, lots of teams were in the mix. Obviously, Arizona was hoping to get what they were asking for in a return, and it's more likely that they'll get that now, but certainly look for a Chikrin deal to be completed probably around the draft time. JT Miller is number 4 in Vancouver. Obviously references the fact that there could be a possible extension and maybe he stays, but it seems more likely that he goes than he stays based on the numbers and everything that's been kind of heard out of Vancouver. We've talked about Miller here quite a bit as well. So I kind of want to focus on more today on players that we haven't really looked at as much. We've got number 5 being the number 2 overall pick in the NHL 2022 draft from the New Jersey Devils. Of course, there's been lots of talk and rumors about that. Really, they're going to have options. There's no doubt. But, they got to be careful here. The last time we seen the number 2 pick in the draft traded was way back when the New York Islanders and the Ottawa Senators hooked up a way, way long time ago, with the Ottawa Senators sending the rights to the number 2 pick along with Zdeno Chara and Bill McCall to the Ottawa Senators in exchange for Alexei Yashin. That number 2 pick was Jason Spezza. So they got Jason Spezza and Zdeno Chara, who were both, obviously Spezza just drafted, Chara extremely young, and they had them, obviously Spezza spent the bulk of his prime years there. Chara was there for a long time. And of course, Yashin was a problem child basically in Ottawa that ended up getting moved to the Islanders, and he did have some good production, but not nearly to the level that was justified by that trade. And things. He had a really unique career and was not the easiest to deal with. So you got to be careful because you don't want to have another scenario like that. That's for sure. But could that pick be traded? It could be. But as much as it's out there that it's available, teams are going to have to really step up if they're going to have a chance to get it done. Number 6 I found interesting being Tony DeAngelo in Carolina. Now, this isn't a case of the player wanting out or the team absolutely wanting to move him or anything like that. It's a case of Carolina going to have a tough time to afford him. I mean, obviously he signed for cheap because he was bought out of New York, and they were able to get him as a free agent. So essentially, they didn't have to give anything up. They got him for a year cheap. He rehabilitated his image, put up some good production, and now he's ready to get paid again. And that's going to be challenging for Carolina to be able to pay him, given their cap situation. They have other guys like Trocheck and Niederreiter up on UFA status as well. And there's been talk that they want to add another, ideally like a good scoring winger, that they need to add more scoring to be able to get over that hump. And this is, it's not a player you want to lose because who's going to give you that production from the back end if it's not him? But it's going to be challenging for them to do. So this is more of a case of if they can't come to terms on a contract that works, that we'd see a trade. But obviously, it's not a scenario that it's necessarily going to happen. John Gibson is number 7 in Anaheim. He says that the body language says he's frustrated. It would be due for fresh scenery and fresh start. It's been talked about it really over the last year or two as Anaheim has worked their way further down the standings. We've seen what Pat Verbeek, the new GM there, did at the deadline, shipping out all kinds of his longtime teammates. Obviously Lindholm, Manson, Raquel. It doesn't exactly give you confidence that you're going to be competitive for a little while. So it does make sense a Gibson trade would be likely. You're looking at teams like Toronto and Edmonton and others that are going to be having goaltending question marks for sure around where they or what they're going to do this offseason because they have decisions to make. So there will definitely be a market for Gibson, no doubt. Tyson Barrie in Edmonton is also another one. He's number 8 on the list. Tyson Barrie, and I talked about this a little bit in the Edmonton offseason video that was out just in the last day or two. It's not a case that they don't like Tyson Barrie, but the problem here is that they're, again, like all teams, have a very tight cap situation. They'd like to try to keep Evander Kane, which is not going to be easy or cheap. Evander Kane also posted a message on his Instagram or social media today, and it kind of sounded like a goodbye message in a way. It was kind of weird. So is Kane not going back? It really makes you wonder. But I think Edmonton definitely wants to try, and if they don't sign Kane, regardless, they're going to have other things to do this offseason with limited space. And Tyson Barrie's almost like a luxury they can't afford anymore. I mean, you can let Evan Bouchard be the full-time power play one guy, quarterback in that power play. Plus, you have Darnell Nurse that's making $9 million. Barrie at like 4.5 or whatever it is he's making becomes expendable. So to me, he still has some term on his contract. There's definitely teams that need the help, and he can give you 40, 50 points for a lot less money than a lot of these other guys that are making $8, $9, $10 million. So, obviously for teams that want that extra push from the back end, he could be an excellent fit. Maybe Carolina, if they can't get Tony D signed for less than that, maybe they consider it. That's a possibility. Just come to my mind here. There's no connection, obviously, between the two teams, but when you're talking about one team not able to afford a D and they have somebody who can give you similar production but a little cheaper, that would be great for Carolina because they're bargain hunters too. Number 11 I found interesting is Jeff Petrie. I'm not going in an order, not covering the whole list here today because there's 25 names on it. We will cover it periodically here over the next few days. 11 was Jeff Petrie, talking about obviously the fact that he had requested a trade and it's still very much believed that Montreal is going to try to move him. Makes sense with their rebuild that they're working on here. Pittsburgh and Dallas are teams that come to mind, mainly because they could be teams that lose key right-handed defensemen like Letang and Klingberg, both UFAs respectively there. And if they don't go back to their teams, they're going to be looking for somebody. And Petrie on a shorter term, even though he makes over $6 million, but there's only a couple years left, does make a lot of sense for them. For 13, I thought interesting was Semyon Varlamov and the New York Islanders. I really think as the Islanders try to find cap space and need to make some moves, I think it's reasonable to think that he's a guy that's moved, but we know that Lou is pretty loyal, so we'll see where that goes. And the number 15 I found interesting as well, again with the Oilers saying that it's likely they're going to move either Jesse Puljujarvi or Kailer Yamamoto. And based on Ken Holland's comments in his press conference, it sure sounded like Yamamoto was more likely to return. So I think Jesse Puljujarvi is very much likely going to get traded. Not a given, of course, but it's very likely they're both restricted free agents, need new deals, and it could be a case where a tight cap situation just won't allow that to fit. So we'll see if Puljujarvi ends up in a new uniform next year as well. So let me know your thoughts on all of these players on the updated trade bait board, as well as the other news here today in the video, and we'll discuss in the comment section. If you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.